Hey, what's going on, everybody? Stanley Parrish here, Pistol Outflow Studios, and welcome back to the show. I hope you're having a creative day today. And in today's tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to shoot in manual mode and get out of auto. Okay, so when I got my first camera, I started out shooting in manual mode. I never used the program or the auto mode because the photographers that I was following at the time, they were all shooting in manual. So that's how I wanted to start out, shooting in manual mode. So I taught myself how to shoot in manual mode. And I'm pretty much going to talk about two things. Number one, first thing you have to do is get out of auto. That's it. Switch your camera right now to manual mode. Get out of auto right now. Number two, you got to learn this thing called the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle pretty much consists of your f-stop, your aperture, which is measured in f-stops, your shutter speed, and your ISO. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is aperture. Imagine a window. We're going to close our eyes and imagine a window that has curtains. Okay, so your aperture, that's going to be the size of your window. Your aperture is measured in f-stops. So, and it gets kind of weird because the higher the f-stop, the smaller the window. So if you have a high f-stop, let's say like f10, f11, f16, that means you're going to have a small window. If you have a low f-stop number like 2.8, 2.0, 1.2, that's a big window. So the bigger the window, the more light is going to come into the room, right? So a low f-stop number equals big window. A high f-stop number, small window. So if you have a small window, less light is going to get into the room. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about in the exposure triangle is the shutter speed. So pretty much the shutter speed is it's pretty much like a curtain. It's a curtain in your camera. Let me take my lens off. There's a curtain inside this in your camera that goes up and down. So if you have a high shutter speed, let's say 1/500th of a second or 1/2000th of a second, those are high shutter speeds. So the curtain, if the curtain opens and closes quickly, that's going to let less light come into the room. Because you're closing the curtains, you're opening and closing the curtains quickly. So if you have a slow shutter speed, like 1/30th of a second, 1/10th of a second, the curtains are going to open and close slowly, which means you're going to be letting more light into the camera. Okay, so I don't know if you can see inside the camera here. But right now I have my camera set to a low shutter speed. It's set at 1/10th of a second. And look at how slow the shutter is moving in the camera. Okay, that's 1/10th of a second. It's pretty slow. So now I'm going to move it. I'm going to change it to a high shutter speed. You're going to see the change of how fast the shutter goes. I'm going to put it on 1/2000th of a second, which is pretty fast. Okay, this is 1/2000th of a second. Okay, I don't know if you can see that. I'll do it again. Okay, so the shutter speed is how fast you're opening and closing the curtain over your window. If you have a high shutter speed, the curtain is going to open and close very fast, which means you're going to be letting less light enter the camera. If you have a slow shutter speed, where the curtain is opening and closing slowly, then you're letting more light into the camera. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about in the exposure triangle is the ISO. The ISO is pretty much how sensitive your camera is to light. So the higher the ISO, the more sensitive your camera is going to be, which means you're going to have a brighter picture. But the thing about it, the higher the ISO, the more grain or noise you're going to get in your photo. Sometimes, you know, a little bit of grain, you may want a little bit of grain in your image, but if you have too much, it'll definitely kill the photo. So you always want your ISO to be 100 if you can. I also want to talk about how you can use your f-stop and shutter speeds to be creative in your photography. So we've all heard the term bokeh, okay? If you've seen those portraits that have the background is just real blurry, that's called bokeh. The only way you're going to be able to get bokeh in your images is you got to have a low f-stop. I'm talking like, you know, 2.8, 2.0, 1.8, 1.2. Those are all low f-stops. So if you're on a budget like I was when I first started out, I couldn't afford those high-priced lenses, but I did get my hands on the 50mm 1.8, and I still use it all the time to this day. The f-stop on that lens goes down to 1.8, and it's very affordable. I'm not sure how much they cost now, maybe $200, $300, I don't know. You can also get creative with your shutter speed. If you use a high shutter speed will allow you to freeze time. So let's say if you're taking pictures of somebody running, like maybe a football game, soccer game, where you have the players running and they're in constant movement and you want to freeze the action, you want to choose a high shutter speed. But you can also get some creative shots by using a low shutter speed. And if you use a low shutter speed, that's going to give you more motion blur in your pictures. So if you're taking pictures of some people walking down the street and you want to show that sense of motion in your photo, you want to use a low shutter speed. You know, 1/50th of a second, 1/30th of a second, 1/10th of a second. Just play around with it until you get something you like. But you can get some real creative shots, man. Just playing around with your shutter speed and your f-stop. Okay, so we talked about the exposure triangle and the f-stop, aperture, shutter speed, ISO. And right now I'm going to go ahead and show you guys some examples of different shutter speeds and different f-stops. Okay, so here we go. Right now I'm outside. I just wanted to show you guys some examples and show you what kind of results you can get by using different f-stops and different shutter speeds. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take a picture of these leaves. I got like a pile of leaves right here, and I'm going to take a couple of pictures at f2.8, and I'm going to take some at a higher f-stop, maybe like f11 or something like that, just so you can see the difference. And then after that, I'm going to play with my shutter speed. I want to take some pictures of these moving cars right here on the highway. I'm going to practice using some high shutter speeds to freeze the action. And I'm going to take some at a low shutter speed so you can see the motion blur when the cars pass by. So let's get into it. Right now, my shutter speed is 1,000th of a second. I'm at f2.8, ISO 100, and I'm just going to see what I get. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I got the background blurred out like I wanted it. So now I'm going to change my my f-stop to f11, I think. So at a higher f-stop, everything is going to be in focus. That's why a lot of landscape photographers, they use high f-stops to make sure everything is in focus. So I'm gonna change my f-stop to f11. And I'm gonna bring my shutter speed down. So my shutter speed is 200th of a second, f11, ISO 100. Okay. I'm gonna bring my f-stop up even higher. I'm gonna try f16. Okay, so I'm at my shutter speed is 1/80th of a second. I'm at f16 ISO 100. So we should see more of the scene is going to be in focus. The background, some of the background should be in focus now. Okay, so right now I'm at 1/2000th of a second at f5.6, and my ISO is 640. Okay. So now I'm going to drop my shutter speed down to maybe 1/30th of a second. All right, so now I changed my shutter speed down to 1/30th of a second. The f-stop is f14 and the ISO is 100. So this should get us some good motion blur. Okay, so before you start shooting, you want to ask yourself, you know, what kind of look are you going for? How do you want the pictures to look? Like for me, I always start out choosing my f-stop. I love to shoot at 2.8. That's just the look that I like. So I always set my camera to 2.8. And I know I want my ISO to be 100. So I always set my ISO to 100. So the only thing left is the shutter speed. You know, if it's a bright sunny day, you're gonna have a high shutter speed. So you just adjust your shutter speed until you get your exposure right. It just depends on what type of look are you going for. Do you want to freeze time? Do you want to freeze the action? Or do you want motion blur? Do you want everything to be in focus? Or do you want that bokeh? You want a blurry background? So those are the things you have to think about when adjusting your settings, like your f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. Okay, so that's it for the tutorial, you guys. I really appreciate you all for watching. Also, if you enjoy the content, if you learned something, please hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next one.